Is there a serial killer in New England right now? I'm Olivia Bennett. I'm a true crime journalist. Let's talk about it. So, over the course of the past 2 months, 10 bodies have been found in the New England area. Connecticut, Massachusetts, and Rhode Island. And local and state officials are saying that the deaths are not connected, but the internet runs rampant with rumors. Let's make a timeline of events so far. On March 6th, 35-year-old Paige Fannin was found dead in the Norwalk River in Connecticut. Her family had reported her missing only days earlier, and her cause of death is still unknown. On that same day, a skull was found in the woods in Plymouth, Massachusetts, and we have very little information about that incident. Then on March 19th, 58-year-old Suzanne Wormser was found dismembered in a suitcase in Groton, Connecticut. Now, that case has actually had an arrest recently. Her roommate, Donald Koffel, was arrested for her murder. And then on March 21st, Denise Leary was found in New Haven, Connecticut. She had been missing for 6 months at that point, and police say that she was a paranoid schizophrenic, but they also say there was no foul play involved. On March 26th, Michelle Romano was found in Foster, Rhode Island in the woods. She had been missing for 8 months, and her death was declared suspicious. On April 9th, the remains of a man were found in Killingly, Connecticut. The cause of death? Still unknown. Then just the next day, on April 10th, human remains were found near the Massachusetts Turnpike in Framingham. We still don't have information on whether or not the remains belong to a female or a male or what the cause of death looks like. Just a couple days later, 12 days later, on April 22nd, Megan Meredith was found dead off a bike path in Springfield, Massachusetts. That death has officially been ruled as a homicide. Then on April 25th, 51-year-old Samuel Stovall was found in the Mill River in Taunton, Massachusetts. Police say that he was known in the area to be unhoused and that his death is not suspicious. Then on April 27th, another body was found in the Connecticut River in Rocky Hill, and that cause of death is still unknown. And that's all that we know in terms of a timeline right now. So we're going to bring on former FBI Special Agent Tracy Walter. She was also a CIA officer, and she's going to tell us a little bit about what this investigation might look like, and in her expert opinion, whether or not she believes that these deaths are connected by a serial killer. We're just going to go ahead and get into the first question. Obviously, right now, there are a lot of internet rumors about a potential serial killer in the New England area based on the evidence that's been given to us so far by police, by state police, local police, what they've told the public. Do you think that there is potential of a serial killer?
So, in my opinion, no. And I understand that a lot of people don't appreciate that candor. But I think when you look at the totality of the circumstances and the victims, it's just not necessarily the work of a serial killer.
So let's talk about how far apart some of these deaths are. And not all of them have even been ruled homicides, which I think is an important thing to note. In fact, several of them, police have specifically said they don't believe any foul play was involved. When we look at the furthest deaths apart from each other, in Norwalk and then in Plymouth, that's about 186 miles. That's almost 200 miles. That's pretty far. Is that something that you would typically see for a serial killer in this small of a time frame?
In this small of a time frame, perhaps not. I just actually got done doing another interview about Keith Jesperson, right? Who he is the happy face killer who killed in Nebraska, Florida, California. I mean, literally all over the United States. But that took place over about 5, 6 years, right? This is really within the span of approximately a month or so. So, in my opinion, that would be really hard to navigate that. Now, it's not to say that serial killers don't commit crimes over large geographical swaths. But I think in a case like this, it would be unusual. Also, there's other serial killer cases in this particular area, and it has been confined to rather small geographic locations.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about being a serial killer in today's world. We have so much we can do with DNA technology, so much we can do with local technology, with phones, tracking people. Security is at an all-time high right now. For someone to be able to kill, this would be 10 people now over the course of 2 months. Would that be difficult? Is this something that would even be plausible?
I think anything's plausible, right? I think the reality is people are always coming up with new ways to circumvent law enforcement. I think, though, with genealogical DNA, with cell phones, with geolocating cell phones, it would be relatively easy to find a suspect. I don't know that we would be able to obviously track them proactively, but in terms of reactively finding a suspect, they would probably be able to hone in on one very quickly.
I want to talk a little bit about speculation and how speculation, especially, internet speculation, can hurt a potential case in the future. Do you think that this internet speculation, that this is healthy discussion, or do you think that this could potentially be harmful to an investigation?
I think it's both, to be completely honest with you. I think the reality is people do become scared, right? Particularly when we see a large number of people being killed in a small period of time. I get that. I think it's healthy for them to have an outlet to be able to discuss that. But where it becomes problematic is a lot of false tips that then get called into law enforcement as a result of some of this speculation. It really bogs down our resources in terms of being able to thoroughly and accurately investigate some of these crimes and bring people to justice.
So, false tips is, I mean, I think a particular thing to talk about. A big part of this case has been a Facebook group where a tip was posted claiming that there were bodies buried in Rhode Island. And that was investigated. Nothing was found. Of course, it's difficult. You want to make sure that everything is fully followed through. You want to make sure that no stone is left unturned. But at the same time, when you're sent on a wild goose chase, what does that do? You said it bogged down resources.
Right. So you have to allocate resources, right, to now go and make sure that there are not actually bodies in this location, because that is the responsible thing for law enforcement to do. If they didn't do that, they would be in a lot of trouble. And so now you've taken away individuals that could be responding to actually active crimes, right? People that need assistance immediately. And that becomes highly problematic because they are running down these false leads that are really born out of this internet speculation.
If it is determined by law enforcement that they are looking for a serial killer, can and should the public trust that they will come forward and let them know?
Yes, I actually do believe so. And I understand where people's hesitancy, right, in being able to trust law enforcement comes from. I get it. I really do, even as someone who is former law enforcement. But I do think that if there is a public safety issue, that law enforcement absolutely will come forward because they have a duty to come forward.
There was one thing in specific that I did want to talk about. So, one person has been arrested in connection to one of these murders so far. In this case of Suzanne Wormser, found dismembered in a suitcase in Connecticut. Someone's already been put away for one of these crimes. Do you think that this sort of dismantles the serial killer theory, or do you think that there is still a chance that the other deaths have some sort of connection, or do you think it's too early to tell at this point?
I think it's a combination of a few things. I think it is too early to tell, but also I think in this case, it really does throw a bit of water on that serial killer theory, and that someone has been arrested in the death of one of these victims. And to kill them in the manner that they did is obviously very, very specific. And that's not how these other individuals, excuse me, were killed. And I think that is really going to point away towards from this idea that there's a serial killer.
So a lot of these bodies are being found in different places. Bodies are being found in woods, they're being found in the water. Parts of bodies are being found, entire bodies are being found. The inconsistencies, does that say something? Does that speak to it potentially not being a serial killer, the case is not being connected, or is that something that wouldn't go into consideration?
I do think it's something that law enforcement in general takes into consideration. The method, right, of death, I think is very important because it establishes patterns, right? And serial killers, in my opinion, are all about patterns. So if you start to get very different manners of death, it's one thing suffocation versus strangulation. That's similar enough, right, to sort of make that connection. But we're seeing very, very different methods of death in this case, and so I think that really points towards the fact that this is not the work of one person.
That makes sense. And especially with the fact that so many of these at this point, as we mentioned earlier, haven't been ruled as homicides. Right now, we have two that have officially been ruled as homicides. One is a suspicious death, and several of them we don't know a lot about it, especially because the victims have been unidentified. The cause of death is not public yet. And these are even, some of these date back to the beginning of March. At what point in time do you start to grow concerned, even if the deaths don't seem to be connected? Is this over the course of several months, lots of bodies start to turn up, a specifically abnormal amount? And I think that's one thing that is important to talk about right now is what we're looking at, is this abnormal or is it just spotlighted because the public is afraid?
I think the issue in this case, right, we know that this has happened since March, but one thing that hasn't really been brought up, and I could be incorrect here, is actually when these individuals were killed. They could have been killed a while ago, and their bodies could be in various states of decomposition, which is why it is taking so long to ultimately identify them and then figure out a cause of death. And so, if that is the case, then really the reality is law enforcement is going to jump pretty quickly to not thinking that this is the work of a serial killer if it's taking place over a large period of time. There's really not a typical, right, in terms of when law enforcement starts to make that, because the reality is someone could have been killed 10 years ago that was the victim of a serial killer, but because people didn't put two and two together at the time, it may have just been ruled as an individual homicide. And so it's really hard to put a number on that time.
I think we've covered everything. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks for watching, and as always, subscribe on YouTube to True Blue, and you can always check us out at watchtrueblue.com. You can follow me at Crime with Olivia for more true crime content. Stay safe.